Welcome to the DARE podcast, where it is all about helping people overcome anxiety and panic attacks. The DARE app has over 1 million downloads and is free to download at dareresponse.com. Now, without further ado, here is the DARE podcast.
Welcome everyone to this special episode of our latest DARE podcast. I say special because I've got a very special guest, Patrick Touhey, who many of you know from the Facebook groups and maybe from DARE Advanced Calls. So Patrick is here in Ireland, spending time with his family and again exploring some Irish roots. Isn't that right, Patrick?
That's correct, Barry. My dad lived in Ireland from age 2 to 12 on a farm out near Belladureen. I probably haven't said that right, but it's always wonderful we visited there again this trip.
Lovely.
And love just feeling his presence there is an awesome experience for me, so I'm very grateful to be able to do that.
You've been doing quite a fair bit of traveling over the last couple of years, haven't you?
Yes, and actually in the last 4 months, I've been to England, Greece, and now this trip here to Ireland. And what makes it very special for me is, for many, many years as a result of the disorder, I established my home as my safe place. And although I did a lot of traveling with my work in the United States, the story of how I managed and white-knuckled that was, extremely difficult, but did it for many years. And so it was not fun travel at all. It was surviving travel. And the thought of leaving the United States was just not an option. I can remember saying there is no way that that's ever going to happen. And so to be in 3 different countries in 4 months is quite a difference than what I was facing in the past with the disorder. So I'm extremely grateful to have that kind of freedom and enjoy seeing other things.
How was the flight over here to Ireland?
So the flight was a 7-hour flight, and it went fine. There was no issues as far as getting here. And, once we landed and went to pick up our car, I was really excited about this trip, even as we were flying over, because of my family being with me and being able to share with them, my heritage and seeing my dad's farm, was
Great.
Really a special experience. So all the time of whatever flight time and, jet lag and all those other things that come with traveling, I just kept focused on the gift of being able to do that.
Yeah, it makes it worth it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you get here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely to be able to share that with your family. They get a deeper sense then of you, where you come from, when you're talking about your dad. All of that stuff makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, my dad had a hard story, Barry. And so, to be able to share that with my family and my kids, to give them a perspective on, just our heritage and some of the things that we experienced and why things maybe materialized in the way that they did over time, starting back to, my grandparents and what they experienced and what life brought them and my dad and then me and then my own kids, and this interesting roadmap of a cycle of things that explain a lot about who we are personally and some of the things that we feel and interpret and things that I've tried to improve upon as I look back at all of that history in respect to my relationship with my daughter and son. And just one perfect example would be the expression of love. And it's not that, love wasn't present. It just wasn't something that was all that, accepted to verbalize it.
Yeah.
And so that made it seem like really simple and ordinary. That, well, Patrick, what's the big deal? You're just telling your kids that you love them. But to do it verbally and to look at them and say it is quite a different connection than just knowing someone loves you. This is just one example.
Yeah. And all of that baggage that often happened with families who were emigrating A lot of that then you had to work through yourself as well. And it's all, I suppose, breaking chains as well of certain patterns as each generation passes, yeah.
It's interesting, Barry, because as I'm able to look back at, so again, I'm just a normal person. I'm not unique in any way. And I'm not saying that, I'm a victim to anything. And so when I share this, I share it from a place of just, it was my experience. And so, there was significant poverty in my upbringing. There was significant abuse in my upbringing because my dad was an unemployable, alcoholic with 10 children. And, the fact of the matter is that what came with that is, emotional and mental trauma. And I only share those things because there were habits and responses that I developed very young around that kind of abuse that was, when you look at panic and anxiety, that would, and as I look back, automatically send off the alarms. Because everything was so challenging and so difficult that if you brought into the mix anything that would rock the boat or make it more difficult or catastrophic was too overwhelming for our family to deal with. And so the response to that was to send up the red flags and to panic and to be really scared about what could potentially happen in an already very difficult situation. And so there's mental trauma that occurs that I had to experience and that I went through that was a major contributing factor to my panic and anxiety disorder. There's no question about that in my mind. And so there was a lot of healing that had to take place for me, not only around how I responded to my anxiety, but my internal thinking of myself, the lack of love, the lack of self-worth, and all of the exterior things that I pursued to try to convince myself that I was lovable and worthy and able to be successful, and all of those things. Those were real. Those are things that I had to be able to take a look at and work on. And so the panic and anxiety, for me was around my entire life. My conscious awareness of it in my own experience wasn't until I was in my late teens, early 20s.
And yet, despite that, you built up a very successful insurance business in your career.
Yes, poverty is an amazing motivator if you can find a way to use it to avoid it and create success for yourself. But the journey in it is not much fun. So I remember at a very young age, Barry, saying, I'm not going to live this way. Now, I had my struggles along the way, and I very much was in a pattern of repeating the cycle until, there were events in my life that I know were God events or divine events that allowed me to take a different turn. But the fear of driving you to avoid poverty is not a very fun experience. But what I will tell you is that it did, in fact, keep me. It was more powerful than the fear of creating success around always being kind of in this state of generalized anxiety and panic in my travel, in talking to people that I thought were smarter than me. Authority figures were very intimidating for me. There were all of these factors going on around my anxiety that the fear of poverty overrode those things.
Wow.
And so that's what kept me going. And you're right, I built a multi-million-dollar business from scratch, and extremely grateful that happened. But I will tell you that a lot of it was, extremely difficult. And I want to say this, but I've learned to celebrate what happened today. That, what a very special opportunity, what a very lucky thing. I'm very humbled by it, and I want to be able to look back and celebrate it.
Was it your dad's unemployment that really spurred you on to be self-employed and to have your own business and to be successful financially?
I wouldn't say that was the conscious driver of it. I can remember being very little and walking in neighborhoods that were, nice neighborhoods and asking myself, I wonder how people ever accomplish being able to live in a house like that. That's something I'll never probably ever experience. And when I started my career, fast forward, just a real quick explanation. Although I had all these other things, I also was able to see that there were talents that I had that, I was making money for the corporation and a lot of other people and doing a lot of the work myself, and I just felt like, Patrick, I know it's scary to go on your own and it may fail, but you do possess the ability, I believe, to do it as someone who could build his own company and potentially have some success with it. And so that's a God moment. Those are those God moments I talk about, because I was incapable on my own accord to truly believe and see that, but yet it happened. There's a story in our family, Barry. So there's 10 siblings, as I said, 6 boys, 4 girls. Our daughter, my sister Regina, died of leukemia at age 2. And in the order of birth, it was Kathleen, Maureen, Eileen, Kevin, Brian, Dennis, Regina, Patrick and Timothy, and Michael. And it was always thought that Regina was our angel. And that she was going to look over us. And share a quick story, if I may.
Yeah.
So when Regina passed, it was very hard on my dad and my mom. We were in Bloomfield, New Jersey. My father was a police officer, and he was doing fairly okay with his life at that point. And when Regina died, I was 1, so I didn't know Regina. And on her death and upon her death, she was not to be talked about. All of her pictures were put away. My father took a very bad turn at that point. And I come to know my sister when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was up in the attic, and I was rummaging around, and I came across this picture of my mother holding this baby. And I ran downstairs and I asked my mom who that was. And she said, "Where did you get that picture?" I said, "I was up in the attic." I was scolded for that, but she said, "That's your sister, Regina." It's the first time I ever knew of it.
Wow.
Moved forward in my life, got a job, and upon graduating, went to the grave site where Regina was buried and asked the director to let me know where her stone would be. And he said, "Patrick, your sister has no stone. She has a little marking that's number 23. And so,
without a name?
No name. We couldn't afford it. So I went to the stone, or the marking, I should say, and I tried to connect to Regina, and I couldn't. The thought of a number, as hard as I tried, Barry, it felt very empty. And I went back to the director and I said, "I want to purchase a stone for my sister." And he said to me that I would have to get permission from my parents in order to do that I could not do that on my own. So I went home and I went over to see my mom and dad, and my mom said, Patrick, I'm fine with it, but your father's going to have to be the one that says okay, and you're going to have to ask them. And I remember, I was in my mid-20s, and I thought I was a 3-year-old walking into the living room asking permission for my dad to. But I was shocked, and he said I could. He said I could do it. So I did. And so when they told me the stone was in place and her name was there, and I had a little prayer put on it, and I went back and I just literally bawled my eyes out, Barry, because it was the first time in my life that I actually felt
connected,
that this is my sister and I'm connected. And you know what? She's been watching over us all along.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
In those moments.
Yeah.
It's funny your father took it so badly, isn't it? With so many kids, and yet he must have had a special attachment to her.
Yeah, he was very proud, my father. There's a very great, he had many great qualities about him. But I love my father dearly, and if he were here today, I would hug him and give him a big kiss. And, he was in pain, in his whole life. His father rejected him at a very young age. His parents were divorced when he came back to the States from Ireland. He lost any relationship with his dad altogether. His dad told him in front of his face, as far as he's concerned, he never had a son. He was a high school dropout. He didn't want to leave Ireland. He did not want to come to the United States. And, he struggled and struggled. And
how old was he when he left Ireland?
he was 12.
Yeah.
And so he has his story, Barry. This is my dad's success. I truly believe this. He's never said this to me, but I do believe this is what he feels, okay? That although he was not a very good father in many ways, he stayed. He didn't leave us. His father left him.
Wow. So, moving on, Patrick, you have written a very successful book called Create Forever Teammates, and it's been wonderful to see online all the engagement that you're getting with the book and the speaking engagements. And I suppose starting off, the book comes from your experience coaching basketball. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the background, how the book came about, first of all.
Yeah, so I would say that, athletics played such an important part in our family's life, and it brought some stability, some consistency. It brought some excitement. My dad was very proud that the boys were good athletes, and so if there was joy around the house, definitely sports probably was somewhat involved in what was going on, and so it was very much a lifesaver for us in that regard. So sports has played, again, a big part. And my brother Kevin was very successful as a coach, and also was very instrumental in what he did for me in respect to teaching me about athletics and playing the game, and then eventually coaching. My coaching involved, coaching very young kids, coaching at the high school level, coaching at the collegiate level. And my brother Kevin actually started this work based on observations and things that he was seeing that he was very sad about in respect to what we were skipping over or what we were squandering in respect to what athletics and sports bring to the experience that are outside of the extrinsic accomplishments, or what I would say material accomplishments, and to ad nauseum, to the point that it became alarming to him. And I observed the same things. What I'm very grateful for is I was getting caught up in that, in my coaching. And
did you mean caught up in the winning?
In the winning, yeah. And so I hired him to come work with my teams, and with the purpose of the damage that was being done, even though I was successful in winning, but the damage in respect to stepping over these intrinsic things called relationships and what's in them, and also what were sacrificing in respect to values. And so when he came to do the work, I fell in love with it immediately. I began to do some of it with him, Barry, and then he passed about 5 years ago now of stage 4 lung cancer. And I was with him the last 4 days of his life, and we had a very long talk, and he had asked me if I would promise to keep doing his work, and I told him I would. And as I began to do his work, I began to realize that not only did I love doing it, but there are things, he wanted me to know that, Patrick, it's not you being me, I want you to continue the legacy in your way. And when I was able to tap into that, there were other things that came to me about what I wanted to integrate into it. And then slowly but surely, I came up with these things that I think would be valuable for others to know. And why not write a book, Patrick, and see if that would be something that, even though you're very afraid to attempt it, that maybe it could help others, and another way to get it out to more people if possible. And so that's what drove me to do it. And I created this book around those intrinsic developments of relationships and connections, and what that means, and who we're being while we're winning and succeeding, and who we're being while we're losing. And Barry, I will tell you that in the athletic world, and even in the corporate world, that we have, in fact, in a very big way, gotten lost in respect to, at the end of the day, isn't it interesting when people say, Barry, that your most significant asset are your people when it comes to a corporation, when it comes to a team? And yet, what are we investing in making sure that that asset, that human being who has a heart and a soul and emotions and feelings and all of these things, what are we doing to integrate building and developing connections around those things which bring true purpose, or at least more purpose and fulfillment in what you're doing, as opposed to the extrinsic developments of crafting your skill to be the best at what you do in a way that's of excellence. I'm not saying that's not important, but what I'm saying is, if that becomes the only focus or the majority of the focus, you lose the heart and soul of a connection to another human being in the process. We were never meant to accomplish things. We really weren't ever meant to accomplish success and other things in life by ourselves, on our own. It's always the human element that makes it that much more joyful. And so when you win championships, see, that's why there are people who never make enough money, because it's the next amount that will make them really happy, and it's the next amount. And what I'm saying is, they're so striving toward that end that the connections that they're making are very shallow. And so therefore, it's a very empty experience.
It's this individualization that's happening, I suppose, all around the world in different areas, and you're talking about it particularly in sports, where it becomes more about the individual than the team. And so what are some of the core things you're teaching in the book to help bring the team spirit back?
Yeah, so there's a number of different things. The one that I think is most powerful, well, there's 3 things that every human being desires, I believe, and I learned this from my brother Kevin. I believe it to be true. And that is that every human being wants to feel appreciated, a sense of belonging or inclusion, and love. So if you can simplify it to that, if you and I were going to start an organization, or we were going to start a sports team, and you and I sat down and said, okay, we have all of these external things, extrinsic things we have to be good at, and we have to make sure we're developing. But if love, inclusion, and appreciation are powerful emotions that bring a sense of joy, how are we in our organization going to grow that, develop it, and implement it? And because it's become such an individualized experience, because Barry, what I explain to teams, and it's amazing when I see coaches' body language when I paint this picture. many, many generations ago, there was not the kind of adult involvement that's involved with athletics today. And even out of athletics. And so I was at a hotel yesterday. I was swimming. And this young boy couldn't have been more than 9 years old. And the weight room had a glass wall that was up against the pool, and so you could see who was working out in the weight room. And there was a adult there with this young boy who was training this young boy, a very vigorous workout in respect to weights and things of that nature. And the thought that went through my mind was, like 9 or 11 years old, I called my friends. We met somewhere. We went to the park. We went to the field. There were no adults. There were no specialists. There were no weight training at 8 years old. There were no anything. And so what we've asked our young kids to do is grow up and be adults very quickly. And this is not about fun. This is about succeeding. This is about getting an edge. This is about outdoing your friends. It's about out competing. So you make the team so that you, and then more so that not only is that not enough, but you have to be above just being on the team. I want you to be the superstar. I want you to be the one that gets all the accolades. I want you to be the one that gets all the print. So we're on a journey here of seriousness, and that's what it's become. And we wonder why there's burnout, less participation, and why people have mental health issues.
Are more depressed and anxious.
More depressed and anxious. And I see it in all my workshops, Barry. When I ask the question, if they're in a place where they feel safe to do so, and I ask them, how many of you experience this mainly as drudgery? And 80% of them will raise their hand. How many of you experience stress, panic, and anxiety? 70% will raise their hands. And that's what we've created. And so vulnerability is one of the lessons in the book. If you can embrace vulnerability and say it's okay not to be okay, if you would just allow yourself to say what you need to say that's scary and maybe embarrassing and maybe shameful, but I'll tell you, there's 9 other people in this room that feel the same way. And if one of us can express it in some way, maybe it'll allow an opportunity in this safe place for a whole bunch of you to let out a breath of fresh air around, this is what I'm really feeling. This is what I'm really afraid of. This is the anxiety and stress and even worse, deep depression or sadness that I'm actually feeling, that I'm hiding. So teaching them vulnerability, it's a strength, not a weakness. Teaching them selflessness. Why is that a benefit? I mean, we cannot take for granted anymore that somehow innately or through social experience that we're observing these things. And therefore they become, of course you should be selfless. Of course you should have concern for others. Of course you should help others succeed. Of course you should do all of these things. Well, we got to go back to basics and teach it. I really believe that, Barry. So selflessness, why is that a benefit? Why would that? Well, I teach them that being selfless exposes you to people you would never ever meet in your entire life, because you're putting yourself out there for others and what that might bring to you, and the fact that giving you get in receiving in ways that you would never imagine. So selflessness, integrity. It matters who you're being, why you're being successful. It matters. Okay? I tell them to wake up, because it's not, if it ever gets so bad, this is what it could look like. In the United States, it's here. So we have, I don't care what your political views are, and it's not about a political argument, but I want you to be aware that the leader and it was President Trump at the time. Not that anybody is perfect, but the leader of the United States of America is demonstrating it doesn't matter how and who you're being in order, as long as you're winning, that integrity does not matter. I mean, if the leader of the United States if we've grown so numb and it's become so ordinary to dismiss that's Donald Trump. How sad is it? And how lost are we really? And we are. We're in it. We're in the middle of it. You young people need to get us back to center, at least somewhere remotely back to center. You're learning getting ahead at whatever cost, and no matter what it entails, is okay. And I don't want you to believe that for a second. It's not okay.
And I think this is why your work is so important, and why it's not just a book about playing better and, even connecting better. It's also a book about vulnerability. So probably, in my mind, the most interesting part of your book is when you speak about your own story, and you are quite vulnerable in the book when you talk about the problems you had with alcoholism and even attempted suicide. So how has that been received? Because it's different than what's out there. Most people will come and teach and coach, but with a certain mask on. You're showing up just as yourself, all aspects of you, the whole spectrum. How has that been?
Yeah. It's, in some cases, Barry, very uncomfortable. Not for myself, but for the coaches and for some of the players. They're not used to a person who knows them from nowhere other than this encounter, who has been willing to stand up there and say, this is my authentic self and what I've experienced in life, in the trials and tribulations and joys and happiness and things of that nature. And I love watching body language and observing, because what happens, Barry, is you'll see those who will drop their head immediately to the ground because they just either are feeling this experience, it's just too much to take in, and they really just want to shut it down. There are others who squirm in their chair, and again, and then there are those who even have the sadness or tears coming down their eyes because they're not ready to maybe put it out there, but they're relieved that someone is actually being so authentic and truthful. And then there are others who can't wait to speak up and share. And so we have a long way to go in respect to the industry and athletics embracing this completely, because it is so very uncomfortable. And the other side of it is there are there are many, many coaches who could and do need to do this work themselves in order to be able to teach it, in order to be able to integrate it. And they're not really ready to go there too, because see, here's the thing, Barry. What does athletics have to do with any of this stuff that you're doing, Patrick? Well, it has everything to do with, because I believe that the athletic experience was very much a part of relationships, which we're going to be in our entire life. And so what we can't lose focus of, and what some of the great coaches understood, was they had a higher responsibility. And that responsibility was, how am I developing people in who they are as humans, and how they're acting and interacting with each other, and how they're helping each other become the best version of themselves. And that's my responsibility. And I need to integrate it, and it needs to be part of it. And so I would say that although it's much more there's much more willingness and an openness for coaches to come in and have me do this work, Barry. There's still a very large population that would rather not have this brought into the program.
Yeah.
Because it's too much. They think it's too much work. And in reality, what they don't understand is that once you integrate it, once you start building it, once you start developing it, it actually creates a culture that is extremely joyful, powerful, and fulfilling.
And maybe they're afraid it'll take the edge off winning. Is there an element of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's this idea that, you have to be tough and you have to grind it out and you have to, just, out physical and out mental in any way, shape, or form the competition. And so you bring this soft skill into it, this emotional, mental side of it. You're going to destroy the fabric of our strength and foundation around grittiness and toughness and fighting and all of those things. And so that's very much, it's very much a part of it.
And I could see why a lot of the kids would feel a bit quite miserable in that experience, because it's the high of winning, which is seldom enough, and then the lows of losing. And it's a roller coaster ride, up, down, no balance.
And that's exactly what happens, is it's extrinsic outcomes that dictate my feeling state of emotions around sadness, happiness, excitement, and things of that nature. And so isn't that an interesting tool to teach? See, what we don't understand is this is why athletics is so important, Barry, right? We're teaching responding to extrinsic outcomes to how you feel about how you feel. And one is good and one is bad. And so if you take it a step further and say, okay, when I leave here and I go on to my career, whatever you're pursuing, whatever that is, good feelings come from good results. Bad feelings come from bad results. And if I'm in bad results and having bad outcomes and bad things, then I mustn't be very worthy. And why is this happening to me? And I need to fix it as quickly as I possibly can. And I need to do something different, or I need to do whatever that might be to get back to feeling good and obtaining success. And it's an endless pursuit. When factually and ideally, the reason why the internal development is so important and learning about emotions and the mental side and the relationship connections is to truly understand that all of life is up and down, is good things and bad things, is just an experience. But as long as I have this human connection and heartfelt connection, as I believe to be the most important thing that anyone can ever do while they're here on Earth, is to develop that no matter what I'm experiencing out there, it's still maybe a high excitement and a low, but I know it's not catastrophic, and I know it doesn't define me, and I know it doesn't totally encapsulate my worth and value and who I am. And that's what we're teaching them. I mean, maybe we don't get that consciously, and we don't. I understand all that. Patrick, you're going way too deep. That's what are you talking about? Well, okay. You could pick people who aren't internalizing it that way as they grow up and experience it, but I could pick a whole bunch of others who are, and that's why they're where they're at. In respect to this, feels more like drudgery than it does joy. And it's never enough, Barry. It's never, when you're teaching that model to most people, it's never enough. I know it personally. It was never enough for me. Materially, what I received was never enough. It's never enough.
So it's a very interesting journey. Tell me about some of the workshops and the experience working with kids there. And
so I love the workshops more than anything. And I'm never disappointed, Barry, when I walk into a workshop and the players there know that they're in a safe place. You know what the gift of in panic and anxiety is? You know, one of the gifts of panic and anxiety, if you get to the other side of it, Barry, is there's a sense in the room from the kids in your energy and your presence. That vulnerability is a beautiful thing. It's okay. I feel it in this person. You know, I feel it in his words. I feel it in his emotion. He's very comforting to be around. That's a gift. That's not something that just comes. See, you have to, I believe, and sometimes I do this all or nothing kind of interpretation. I don't mean it to be that way, but if you have experienced pain and suffering, and you have experienced the hardest of hard times, and you have the grace to be able to, and I have a relationship with God, to be able to get to the other side of it and be in front of a bunch of other people in your authentic self, that is a beautiful, beautiful gift that I would have never had I not experienced the pain of anxiety and panic to the point of suicide. So when I'm in that workshop and I'm my authentic self, Barry, I'm never disappointed that the players want so badly to be able to talk about these things. They're starving for it. Now, there's a percentage of them that are too afraid. They will protect themselves. Their egos may be too strong. They may interpret this as weak and failing. But there's never a failure of a percentage of people in that room who, if you let them, really want to talk about these tenets that I have in the book and how it's going to benefit them in their relationships with each other and their personal growth. And here's what inevitably happens. One player will be courageous, and then all of a sudden another, and then another, and then another. And all of a sudden in a group of 30 people that are in the room, you've had 15 to 12 that have actually stood up, and I make them stand up. I shouldn't use that word. I ask them if they would be willing to stand up and talk about what they need to talk about. And inevitably, when everybody leaves that room, Barry, even those that didn't speak up, here's what goes through my mind. There's a percentage of them that wanted to but were too afraid, but they do know at least they're not alone anymore. And maybe they'll talk to one of their teammates in private later, and we gave them that opportunity to do that. There's a whole bunch of others who will not get any of it and think it's garbage and believe that doesn't belong in it at all, and who have gone to their coaches and expressed that. That I say to myself that, Patrick, it's a seed. That's all it is a seed. They haven't gotten it yet. And maybe they will. Maybe they won't, but that's not what your job is here. And so those are the things. Really, very quick story. For a highly successful football program, several state championships. Coming season, predicted to win another state championship. One of the best teams in the state. This is a workshop that my brother Kevin did. And he asked the question, how about this question, Barry? Can you imagine a group of 50 players? Can you imagine? Who needs to change the most in this room in who they're being as a person that's holding this team back from loving each other?
Wow.
Silence. Silence. Kevin told me, Patrick, let the silence sit. Just sit with it for as long as you need to. And sure enough, it probably seemed like 3 hours, but it was a couple minutes. a young man stood up who was a sophomore and said, this person, I won't say his name, needs to change the most. Now, this person led the state in running touchdowns the year before. He was an all-state running back. He was the most popular kid in the school. He was 3 times the size of this sophomore. It wasn't a senior that stood up. It was a sophomore. And Kevin asked him to elaborate on what he needed to change. He's one of the most selfish people I've ever met in my life. He only cares about himself. He has a clique of friends. Everyone else is excluded. He's rude. He's mean. He's a bully.
Wow.
Another person gets up. Another person gets up. Another person gets up. Now all of a sudden there's 20 players. Because this one sophomore, who was a third of his size, took the courage to put it out there. And if that player was here today sitting with us, Barry, he would tell you that that moment changed his life forever.
Really?
Yeah. Because that season, he took in the dummy bags. He carried the water. He made sure every player on the team felt included. He became this very unselfish person who cared more about others' success than his own. He became a great captain and leader. And he would tell you today that that moment changed his life. That's the beauty you get from doing this work. And really, if you allow young people to feel safe enough, they won't disappoint you. They won't disappoint you. And not everybody will get the lesson. And it doesn't matter always if the coach gets it, because if the team buys into it, if the team embraces it, if the leaders make sure it's a focus as they move along, because they will fall short because we are human. That's part of the beautiful process of the growth, that they will take care of it themselves. They won't need the coach to do it.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to get to. That's why coaches will come to me and say, you come and do this. You do it so I don't have to.
Yeah.
And then eventually, as the players get it, they just do it themselves.
Yeah. Well, I could see why, in his case, he probably just was not aware of his behavior until all of these people held a mirror up to him.
You know, I think a big part of it is some of the players that stood up were friends of his that he cared about.
Okay.
But never had the courage to. You know, this is what I teach them, Barry. I ask them to be aware and try to be courageous, because the sense of, one of the biggest holes that we have, and it isn't necessarily just in our youth, I see it in my own company with my own people, is this unbelievable urge to feel belong, that you belong. What happens with that, and I write about it in my book, is you will seek this strong sense of belonging and sell your values out in order to do it. Okay? In some cases. And what do I mean by that? Well, I know this player acts in a way that is extremely harmful, but he's popular. And he has a lot of people that think he's God's gift to the world. And there's so many things that I don't agree with him about in respect to the values that he executes. But boy, I've got about 8 friends that I really care a lot about, who, between all of us, none of us are courageous enough to call him out. But boy, we belong to a really special group.
And they don't want to lose that.
They don't want to lose it. The pressure. Leadership is suffering because even at the college level, with the college teams I work with, they don't want to gamble on being isolated or not belonging, to hold their value, to values, to execute confrontation and difficult discussions. Because the risk of not belonging, which tells us what, Barry? And this is where coaches say, Touhey, your stuff is just too deep. This basically, the bigger problem is let's go beneath that. Why do you have to have that? Well, I know why, because I was that person. See, because I wasn't enough, and I had to feel like I belonged, feel as though I had worth, feel as though I was lovable around people who were popular, people who were liked, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, Barry, inside of me was my authentic self saying, hey, you forgot about me. I'm here. You're doing things that I totally disagree with about who you are. And you're making me more lonely. You're getting further and further away from me, not closer to me. And so when I look at that, the bigger question is, what is it about you? See, what that tells me is, and this is a rocket scientist, what is it about you that you don't like so much? That you're selling your values, your authentic spirit, in order to belong. And in your leadership role, which, by the way, is a very significant responsibility, how can we get good leadership if that's what's driving you? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not possible. And coaches will say to me, we just don't, this generation, these kids, they don't know how to lead. Oh, no kidding. We haven't addressed it. We haven't talked about it. As they're growing up, they don't.
It hasn't been modeled.
It hasn't been modeled. Mm. And so we have to get back to basics. Well, what do you mean by that, Touhey? Well, are you willing to take a third of your practice time and bring it into the classroom? And take my tenets in my book and teach them and not lecture them, because you won't gain very much ground. In other words, it has to be a collaborative, co-creative effort. You have to be a facilitator, not a lecturer. You have to guide the conversation. You have to guide the engagement, that it's coming from the boys and the girls and the men and the women in the room. Because when they have that kind of dialogue and feedback from each other, it's coming from their heart. They're taking more ownership. It's more theirs than it is some authority figure telling them they need to behave better, and here's why you need to behave better, and here are the consequences if you don't behave better. And in my day, this is how we did it, and I can't believe all this garbage I have to deal with. You have to be a counselor and a therapist and everything else to deal with you people, and blah, 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 and then they wonder why there's no progress made.
Yeah, it's very important work, the work that you're doing. And I'd say there's very few people doing it. That would be my impression anyway.
There's not a lot, Barry, and it's interesting because one of the things Kevin communicated to me before he passed was Kevin always had a knack, Barry, of seeing something way ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. And so when he started doing this work many, many, many years ago, it was extremely frustrating for him because there were so many doors closed in his face and so many that didn't really have any interest in it whatsoever. But he was so committed to it and so passionate about it, he never gave up. And if you fast forward to today, although, yes, it's definitely there's more openness to it, there's more willingness to it. There are not a lot of people doing this work, and there's still not an overwhelming amount of organizations or people that even want to bring this kind of depth to it that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And so, but like Kevin, I will never abandon it, and I do believe that it's much more possible that more will want to do this work than what he had. So maybe it's the next person or the next person or the next person. As it is, back to your original question about writing the book, if I write this book and I put it out there, I had no preconceived notions that one would sell. And I didn't do it for that. But if somehow it could get out there and it could reach people to at least read it and take a look at it and consider it, that it was a way to reach out to more than just a physical workshop.
Yeah. It makes such common sense, the whole approach. I can't imagine anyone disagreeing with it. And definitely parents listening would be wholeheartedly behind it. I don't see how you couldn't be, because we all know there's something inherently wrong with the way things are currently done.
There's no question about it. I say in my book a number of times, and I don't even know if it's accurate to say it this way. Some of me said it in this way because I didn't want to be too. I'm a parent myself, and I wanted to be able to have this perspective around what was it like for my own children, and parents have just gotten caught up in the rat race and keeping up with the Joneses and the fear of their children not succeeding, that it's not necessarily their fault. It's become a cultural, societal thing that we have to wake them up. Mm-hmm. We have to put them into shock and say this is not what this was ever meant to be. Mm-hmm. What we've made it. To have a 9-year-old in a weight room lifting weights and doing exercises because you have to be the best at this sport, son. I'm just, like, as I'm swimming, looking at this young boy yesterday, Barry, saying to myself, will he ever feel joy in doing this if this is the regimen he keeps up at 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, 15? He's now in high school. He's put...
Oh, don't worry. Mic down.
He's put 6 years of work into it. What happens if he doesn't make the team?
Oh, yeah. Everything that he's been working towards, yeah.
What happens to the parents when he doesn't make the team? Because the parent is invested in it the whole time, too. See, I'm not just your dad. I'm your personal investor and coach and everything else. And so not everybody makes the team, right, Barry?
Very few make the team. Yeah.
How are you preparing that young man for that? And how are you preparing yourself for it? I'm working with a 16-year-old person whose whole life is controlled, and the experience this person is having with sports is her dad's journey. Who is loaded with anxiety, who was at an event 6 months ago and experienced a major panic attack out of her first one, and had no idea again, we all know, although panic and anxiety is so much more aware today, and all she keeps feeding back to me is what my dad keeps telling me, is that I have to be the best at this so that I can get to the best school, so that I can get the best job, so that I can become a CEO, so that I can become very wealthy. Okay, hold on a minute. How old are you? 15. Okay, so you just went fast forward 20 years with this kind of weight on your shoulders. When do you take a breath of fresh air and say, what's in front of me right now that I can be joyful about? There will be happiness along the way, but it will be in the extrinsic achievements, which only lasts for so long. Mm-hmm. And so if I were to sit on top of your shoulders right now and somehow replicate what you're carrying around, how accurate would that feel if I asked you what you're feeling right now and the weight you're carrying around? And she just unloaded in tears.
Massive stress. Yeah.
And I said to her, by the time we're done working with one another, and by the way, I would like to talk to your dad if you are okay with that. See, I think, I could be wrong, but by the time we're done working with each other, you'll be happy to be a nanny in Italy for the rest of your life, if that's what you want to do. We were done, and she said, is your offer to talk with my dad still on the table? I said, absolutely. So the dad came. This is a Zoom meeting. He's sitting there, the dad. He gave me very articulately how he deals with his struggles and blah, 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 blah. And he asked me about his daughter. I'm not going to prolong it other than to say it obviously became very obvious to me. Again, this is all about him. It is all about him. And I just looked him in the eyes in the Zoom camera, and I said, let me ask you something. So first of all, your daughter's in tremendous pain. I don't know if you know that or not, but she's in tremendous pain. And she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, you. So, whose journey is this? Is it like, do you want her to get over panic and anxiety so she can get back on course? Or do you want her to get over panic and anxiety so she can have a happy and joyful life, no matter what that might look like? Which one is it? Oh, you fix my daughter. I said, I'm going to fix your daughter, but I don't know if you're going to be real happy with the results.
Because it's nothing to do with sports.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? You need to take a real good look in the mirror. Now, that took a lot of courage in respect to not patting myself on the back. He may have gotten off and said, we're done with that man. Mm-hmm. He has no idea what he's... Guess how many sessions I've had with her since, Barry? 15.
Wow, so he was open to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he texts me. He texts me and says, when can we do the next one? Because guess what he's seeing? Results. His daughter didn't quit. She's still doing it, but it's for a whole different reason. It's her journey. It's her joy she's tapping into. Not his weight, not his success story, not what he's identified. It has nothing to do. All she's doing is giving herself permission to not have that anymore.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. Maybe he gets that, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. All he's seeing is the results. So you need to keep going back to this guy.
But at least it's hers now. She owns it.
It's hers.
Yeah. So you're very familiar with DARE and the DARE tools. How would you see it being applied in athletics?
Boy, in so many ways, Barry, in so many different ways. So first of all, the idea of just the toll that athletics takes on a person mentally, physically, and emotionally is, when you're competing, when you're really competing, it goes without saying that you're going to experience anxiety. You're going to experience high stress. And if I imagine when I was an athlete, if I had the tools of DARE in my pocket as I was moving along, how much different the athletic experience would be for me. And this thought of having this ability and DARE being diffuse, allow, run towards, and engage. When you have this ability to be able to take what's in front of you, and I look at the diffuse and allow and accept as simply being that, Patrick, there's really nothing you need to do about this other than to just experience it and let it be what it needs to be. How freeing that would have been to me, as opposed to the nervousness around failing, being rejected, not being looked at as someone who had any benefit or value, because there'd be all these. It wouldn't be accepting. It would be fighting. It would be this grinding it out. It would be me for me. It would be I got to overcome all this on my own. And if I had this ability to tap into that kind of tool during those experiences, I would have been a better person and a better athlete in the process. What DARE has taught me is this, that there is going to be disappointment. There's going to be failure along the way. That's going to be part of the process. And those times are going to be painful emotionally. What tools do you have to be able to work through those moments when those times occur, and to help you with your anxiety level and your stress level when you're dealing it? This idea of, and allow and accept is so simple, Barry. However, when a person truly is able to embrace that and understand it, the power of allowing and accepting in itself it is very sad and unfortunate that we're not teaching these tools in the school system and in the athletic system. Because the experience it's so applicable in so many different ways. Run toward is, to me, I see so many players who run away from failing because it's too scary. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if I can run toward it, if I can learn to say, you know what, bring it on, man, let's go. There's so many more things I would have done, Barry, that I avoided because of the fear. And so many things that I see from athletes, and I bring this to their awareness, and I teach them. DARE is very much part of what I do in my workshops around the tools that are required, and that tool alone. Be excited about running toward it and saying, "Give me your worst, bring it on. I hope I fail completely." Because I can learn something from it. It's just an experience. It's nothing to be afraid of. No judgments. Let's get excited about doing that. Can you imagine if that was your mindset around all of that stuff? What your potential would potentially be, and what things you would potentially do that you don't do because of running toward is too scary. I can remember when that came to me early on in the program. When it was said you need to run toward it, I can remember internally thinking, these people are crazy.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to bring that. More pain on? More failure? No way. That's not going to happen. And it is an unbelievable tool. So, and then I do want to talk about engage, because you have to, this idea of being present, okay? This is how I bring it into the athletic experience. We are so not engaged. We are so projecting, and so out there wanting to get to where we want to get to, that we're not engaged in the present to the degree that we need to be in what we're presently experiencing and engaging ourselves in. And then what happens is, again, with many athletes, there's a percentage of athletes that I observe that who are so self-aware and so not sure that the idea of engaging with another person, especially when there's people who either don't allow that person in, or the person is so afraid to engage that it's just easier not to, okay? Mm-hmm. What I mean by that, Barry, is this. That let's use this athletic experience to help each other engage. And what I mean by that is, those of you who are afraid to engage, we're going to challenge you to do so. But those of you that are aware that they're afraid to engage, we need to be empathetic and understanding so that we can bring them into engagement. And in that regard, it's this wonderful thing to watch someone who lets go of this outcome of a future result so that I have the ability to engage presently in a way that I experience things more joyfully, because I'm not carrying the future at 15 years old at me at this moment. How could you possibly be engaged when your overriding mental thoughts are around getting to that CEO position? And if you are engaging, what is the depth of it, of your presence? What is the depth of, me even really caring what you're saying to me? So this engaging part is critical. I know in Dare this, Barry, if you don't engage, it's for my experience, I don't know that I would have been able to get to where I'm at today. So if I just did the diffuse, allow, and run toward, I'm not so certain I would even be sitting here with you today. Because I was someone, although on the outside looking in, it appeared I was this very confident, self-assured person. I was very uncomfortable with engaging because I wasn't able to be present. I wasn't able to enjoy the engagement. I was so hung up on all the other things.
Yeah.
And so if we can teach young people to engage in a way that you're present, to challenge yourself to engage when your anxiety is telling you not to, and because you feel safer and more comfortable by not doing it, then let's try to work on that.
Yeah, makes great sense. And it's in the engagement where the connection happens and all of the things you're talking about in the book. Yeah. The team spirit is built and the joy of sport as well, isn't it?
No doubt.
In the moment.
A very high percentage, if you pay attention to the words, when a team, it's not always, but it's a very high percentage. When you listen to the words from a player or a coach, why do you think this team was so successful in winning the championship? More often than not, at some point in the conversation, that person's going to say that this team absolutely loved each other. They absolutely loved each other. I talk to CEOs and coaches about, if love is the most powerful emotion known to humankind, and it is, why would we not want to find a way to integrate that in our organization? And I'm not, maybe we need to do a better job of defining what I mean by love. And that just came to me, by the way. Maybe it's...
I think people get caught up in the word as well because there's so many meanings to it. Yeah. It almost needs to be redefined.
Yeah. Why wouldn't we want to do that, Barry? Why are we so afraid? I know why. I just put those out there. I know exactly why. I do know why. But we need to put it out there and see. To the point that we have a bigger responsibility, I believe, and we have a bigger cause, and that is, my time here, Barry, and the time that I have left, being as human as I am, as imperfect as I am, in all the things that I am in respect to what I experience as a human being, we owe the world better than what we're doing.
Well, I think that's a great point to finish on. Thank you, Patrick. So for people listening, where can they go? Find out more?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So I have a website. It's www.eliteperformancetouhey, that's TOO-E.com. You would be able to order the book on my website. There's also the ability to contact me if you wanted to hire me to do work for your organization or team. You can also Google Create Forever Teammates, and there are various outlets that make the book available, and obviously Amazon being one of the most popular to be able to get access to the book. But I have a Facebook page, Elite Performance Touhey, and a Twitter account, but those are the various ways you can contact me and get access to the book.
Great. Well, I'd encourage anybody who is interested to definitely reach out, and maybe the starting point is the book, Create Forever Teammates by Patrick Touhey. Patrick, thank you very much for this interview.
Thanks so much, Barry. It's always so great to see you, and I love you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the DARE podcast. The DARE app has over 1 million downloads and is helping people all around the world to overcome anxiety and panic attacks. You can download the app for free at dareresponse.com.